Good afternoon. So what I'm going to do is, this is the beginning of the conversation about all the topics at this symposium, and then my particular role is to actually go even further back to the beginning, into the first words of this topic that we're talking about, which is young people. We'll hear that phrase being used time and time again over the next 3 days, young people, because that, in a sense, is the lens by which we are viewing this upcoming Synod of Bishops, which is informing this particular symposium. So I'd like us really, so for the next 20 minutes, we're just going to dive deep into those two words in English, young people, and kind of explore what are we talking about, because how we understand that will impact a lot of the other conversation points we have going forward. So specifically, in the Synod preparatory document that precedes this Synod process, in that the Synod office says, in the following pages in this document, the word, and it was translated, and the translation that came over from Rome was youth, or Giovanni from Italian, jóvenes in Spanish. So just to let you know, those were the words that were used in the document. Refers to persons who are roughly 16 to 29 years old, while bearing in mind that the term needs to be adapted to local circumstances. Now, what we are working with here, though, is a linguistic and cultural translation that we need to kind of look at here. Because as you see in the text, it was translated in the English version on the Vatican website, the word Giovanni was translated as youth. So when we looked at this from the United States, as we kind of reflected on our Synod process at the Bishops' Conference, Cardinal DiNardo, our president of our conference, reported that in kind of reviewing this, he said the age range of young people is comprised of several different groups, including high school youth, college students, and young adults, and they come from many ethnic and cultural communities. Going on to say that each grouping has distinct developmental, emotional, and spiritual needs and experience, and reminding us that ministry with these age groups is unique and should be not lumped together. So this is the premise of the next few moments here, is really to go into that and to really kind of get into this notion. So I'm going to put the Italian word, because that's kind of the source. This is our source document here, our source word that we're working with, the Italian word Giovanni. And it's trying to really grapple with what do we understand by youth and young adulthood in the church and in society. It is, by the way, this is a vast topic. This is a topic that you could just even go further deeper. So what I've done is actually provided some handouts with some really cool stats about the Giovanni of the United States. So kind of giving you a little bit of that. So while you have time for pleasure reading throughout the next couple of days, feel free to flip through. It's great evidentiary support of some great things that are, in terms of the trends that are happening. We won't get into all of that, but we can certainly tackle that in some of the Q&A afterwards. But the notion of Giovanni, now when the translation in the United States, I just want to begin by saying we just, for the purposes of the Synod, we don't necessarily want to say a Synod on youth. Anytime you hear that phrase, a Synod on youth, we need to kind of say, stop, hold on, this is broader than that topic. It's youth and young adults. It is young people, that's the phrase we've been using a lot. And this notion of this age range, so the age range of 16 to 29, is a concept here in the States which we may struggle with because we don't necessarily have many ministries to that range of 16 to 29. We have different ministries, as you heard Cardinal DiNardo say, that comprise that. In Europe and in other parts of the world, there may be ministries that focus in on that, but in the United States perspective, we have multiple groups within that, which therefore makes our engagement with the subjects of the Synod a little more complicated. It's a little more work on our part because we can't just do a one-size-fits-all. There are multiple dimensions to this because we've been handed this word. This is technically the first word of the Synod in the Italian. And we know, though, that this is much more complicated. So how do we define it in the United States? Over the course of our history, in 1997, we worked on, the bishops came out with the pastoral letter renewing the vision, which focused on youth ministry. And in it, it says the ministry with adolescents must be directed towards presenting young people with the good news of Jesus Christ and inviting and challenging them to become his disciples. It's interesting, as you go through this document, the seminal document of our bishops' conference on youth ministry, the word youth is actually very rarely used in this document. The majority word that they use is adolescence, because it frames in this document who we're talking about. Because they also had a sense that the word youth has multiple meanings in different cultures. So the word adolescence is used most frequently in this document. But then there's also this other document on the other part of the age range, Sons and Daughters of the Light, which is the bishop's work on young adults. And as they say, young adulthood refers to people in their late teens, 20s, and 30s, single, married, divorced, or widowed, with and without children. Now, this is a very broad category, and we're going to get in a moment how broad that is. But just to even give you some faces, and actually, so I have 3 faces to show you, and I've got a 4th face that I'll ask to raise their hand in a moment. But so, as you know, in the next couple of weeks, there's going to be a pre-synod gathering of young people who will be meeting with the Holy Father to really kind of continue to unpack what we're doing with this synod. These are 3 delegates who will be representing the United States. Notice they are all young adults. And there's a 4th one who's actually in the room here. Nicole, would you stand up for a moment to this is our other delegate here. So Nicole, these 3, and there's some others as well who will be representing they're from the United States. These 3 are representing the Bishops' Conference. Nicole is representing a particular movement. There's another representative who's from our Eastern Rite churches in the United States. So there's different dimensions of how young people will be represented. So, but as you can see, they're young adults. And actually, they represent all different types. So we have a single person. We have a married person. We actually have an engaged person. Congratulations. We have a religious brother. So you see, we tried to also show the diversity in the representation. And there's many terms that you'll hear being used, and I won't go into depth, but these are some words that you hear bounced around. We talked about adolescence, which is an issue related to growth, which is a physical and mental, emotional growth that happens a period of time. Extended adolescence is a term that's recently come into vogue, more or less to designate that the markers of adolescence aren't quite ending at the traditional end point, which, I throw this 3rd term, the age of majority. That's the age, that particular age has special significance in the United States. As you know, we are a very legal, education-based, civically minded society. So that age of majority, which is the age at which the legal responsibilities shift from your parents to you, we have it as 18 in our culture. There's other ages in different countries. So that 18 barrier is very critical for us in the United States, because those who are minors and those who are majors, or those who have the age of majority, would be in different camps. And in particular, with the reality of child and youth protection today, which is very much present in our churches and in society at large, that the age of majority takes on even more significance there too. So it's a clear marker of some divisions in that. But as you know, in the 16 to 29 range that the Holy Father has given us, that 18 is not the beginning age. It's slightly towards the beginning, but it's still in the middle of that. There's early adulthood and emerging adulthood. We have different generations that are represented. We have youth and young adults. So these terms, these terms get used in this demo. And again, a whole other session just to kind of unpack what all that is. And then within young adulthood, you have the collegiates and the non-collegiates who are within 18 to 23. In fact, you'll see on one of the other stats in the other handout that 29% of those U.S. young people between the ages of 18 or 25, 29% go to a 4-year institution. 10% go to a 2-year institution, and 60% of all young people in the United States who fall between 18 and 25 do not go to college at all. Now that's just mind-blowing, because we often think, especially if you come from an affluent area, from an area that's prone to higher education, that every young person who turns 18, 19 is going off to college. But 60% of them are not at all. And then another 10% are going to a 2-year school, which, as you know, will probably involve getting right into the working world. You have your 20s and your 30s. You've got your singles, you're engaged, you're married, your parents. You've got people of different economic and employment statuses, and you can see from the handout some different trends related to the employment and the economics. Critical intercultural experiences are part of that, and I'll let Ken go into more detail in his session, but the fact that this is an incredibly diverse, culturally diverse generation, and how each cultural group takes the, developmental skills are actually somewhat different across cultures because of the economic factors, because of the cultural, the history, etc. So with right now, all of a sudden, this, hey, what do we talk about this young people category? It's all of a sudden getting a lot more complicated, isn't it? A lot more thick, a lot more, so there's some other stuff. What else distinguishes adolescence, for instance, from early adults? So you've got this 16 to 29 age range. So the 16 to 19-year-old will be in this adolescence category, and then you see the early adulthood would be the other part of that. So where they're searching for is distinct. So the adolescence, your search is for self-identity. In early adulthood, it's for intimacy. Your key relationships when you're an adolescent is your peers and your role models, and that changes to colleagues, to a partner, to a new community. So you see these, different things. Their virtues for an adolescent is social fidelity. They are loyal to the group. They are loyal to their social networks. Whereas in early adulthood, your loyalty really starts to gravitate around a smaller circle to specifically a particular individual that you may spend your life with, or a vocation for which you are called to. So these are just some things, and these are from the Ericksons, who really kind of laid the foundation for some of the different life cycle aspects. Other developmental factors to keep in mind, as I said, the search for identity, for intimacy, the social connections, finding meaning in work and vocation. These change. A 16, 17-year-old answers some of these things differently than a 22, 23-year-old, than a 28, 29-year-old. So even across this range, you've got different perspectives on this. Again, not to complicate things, but it complicates things. There's also key transition points, and this is a huge factor, because one of the things that does unite all of these ages together is that there are key transitions at play, multiple transitions that are happening very rapidly. So you go from high school to college, work, or service. You go from your college to your career, and within your career, your engagement to marriage, to parenting, leaving home, moving geographically, a lot of crises that cause transition as well. This age range, this young people range, if there is one consistency, is that there's no consistency of where they are. It's marked by this rapid, quick, often simultaneous transitions happening at the same time. So developmentally, that has impact on you. You look at the generational differences. The generation, now we're talking here too about two different generations. So we're starting to flip over to the next thing. So everyone keeps talking about the millennials. Millennials, sorry to say, they're getting old. Technically, actually, I think my number is actually a little off here. Technically, a millennial would potentially be up to 38, 39 years old. So what we kept thinking about the millennials as these young things, well, they're starting to reach that age, So we've also got this new generation, Generation Z, which we're finding increasingly that they're a lot different than the millennials. I called it Uber tasking, but they take multitasking to a whole other level. But millennials, we always knew that they were motivated by purpose and ideal. Well, now this Gen Z is motivated by security. They want to make sure that they're safe. That's the key thing. If I'm safe, that's the first priority. Millennials, more or less, were voted, what is the ideal? We actually see a little bit of an accordion effect, because with in a way, the Gen Zers are somewhat an echo of the Gen Xers, who are more, some of their parents. The millennials are somewhat an echo of the boomers. So there's a little bit of that going on. So you see some X values kind of being integrated with them as well. So those are just some things. Again, different aspects of the generations. And then in our synod consultations, Cardinal DiNardo noted that these were things that came up in our process across the United States. And there were distinctions between what youth and what young adults responded to this. So you see these observations are matched up by our work that we've done over the last several months. And of course, their strongest needs and desires, mentorship, support in that transition, and church ministry, which kind of leads me to my final point about what are we doing as church to respond to these many different things? So one of the observations, for instance, that was made is that the church needs to be doing more, first of all, for young people, but especially with areas that often get overlooked, young adults, those in Hispanic Latino communities, those in other cultural communities, African American, Asian Pacific Islander, Native American. Those going through key transition points also needed a little bit more attention. That was areas where there wasn't as much. So these are just observations. And as you know, when we talk about the ministries we work in, these are just a sampling here. Youth, high school campus, university college campus, Pastoral Juvenil Hispana, young adult ministry, and of course, even within those, depending upon cultural, geographic, situational things, there's multiple ways that we are doing ministry. Now, one thing that has spread across for the last 25 years, that is really in this country spread across all the young people, regardless of generation, regardless of adolescent or young adult, and that is World Youth Day. World Youth Day is the church's international response to young people. By the way, 25 years ago this year, so if those of you who, like myself, were there as a young person, we really feel old now. And the efforts continue on. There are national efforts that continue to have almost been birthed by World Youth Day in Denver when it really came to the United States and have really helped out on a national level. The Encuentro process is certainly a part of this as well. The bishops are calling us to really look at the Hispanic Latino reality, and within that, especially young people as part of Encuentro. And then, of course, we come to the Synod. The Synod this year is really, and our efforts that we're doing, this symposium itself is part of the narrative that is kind of responding to all of this. And so we're really grateful to Notre Dame for that. On a national level, we're creating this national dialogue. You'll see more information in the handouts on the national dialogue, which is an attempt. One of the things we noticed is that all these efforts are spinning at the same time. This national dialogue is a way to bring all of the church's efforts in all these different areas together to try and come to the table around one table, while still respecting the distinctions and differences across that. So as we go forward with this, we are aware of the vast dimensions of this age range. I'm giving you a mile a minute kind of unpacking of how distinct one part of this age range is from the other. So when we speak about this synod, don't say synod on youth. Don't say synod on young adults. Say synod on youth and young adults because that's what the age range we've been given. Synod on jóvenes if you need to use the Spanish. But whatever you do, make sure that you understand that it's so multidimensional. And that also means that the solutions, that the conclusions, the implications that we talk about over the next couple of days, there's not just going to be one size fits all. There's not going to be one solution. There may be things that work for the younger end of the demographic. There may be things that work for the older end of the demographic. And we have to be okay with both and. And so this is a key moment in the church. We cannot be monodimensional with what we do. And I think that we will see some great things when we end up with this thing. So thank you very much for your time. And when you have questions, I'll answer them.